Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for some short stories and or some poetry. We play some independent music and we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford in the York Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. And you can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So this week we are going to be chatting to Gemma Applegarth, who is a runner and mindfulness coach. But before we do that, we are going to head over to the Rhylight Zone. And this week we have some new poems by myself, Dane Cobain. New poems. Signally Freud. In 1898, I forgot a psychic. I shall now repeat, I forgot a psychic. In 1898, I undertook a psychological analysis. I'm pregnant with examples, practically unimportant but content with answers. A deep determinant, exhaustively examined. I shall now repeat, I forgot a psychic. Immediately recognised, I obtrude myself with great tenacity, lawful and rational in direct relation to psychic arbitrariness. I shall now repeat, I falsely recollected a psychopath. Schooled in Milan or Herzegovina, a newly emerging theme submitted to fate, a lit mag. If I knew he could be saved, I wouldn't save him. He values sexual pleasure above all else. He has no charm, like life. A sad event, an accidental occurrence. I wanted to forget something, a deep repression that's lost in reproduction. No information was given, no motive, nothing causative, for it's quite probable I shall now repeat I forgot a psychic. Suppression succeeds without symptoms, substantive names occur spontaneously. Signorelli, Signorelli, Signorelli. The algorithm said. The algorithm said fiery giants of the earth spewed ash and smoke into the sky, also spewed lava and steam rhyming surface and purpose, steam and dream, half rhymed afar and apart like where my girlfriend is at Bristol Christmas. The algorithm said death from above is a beautiful dream, chaos and purpose and a deep, dense darkness. It said sapience is a sibilant saviour, it struggled to write without rhyming couplets. The algorithm said our minds unfurl with great responsibility. We have a gift and it didn't come down the chimney. It wished me a Merry Christmas. The algorithm said it would write me an essay. It had no personal experience when it came to death, but do any of us? It viewed my writing as powerful and relatable. The competition was offensive and distasteful, heaped superlatives like ash and steam as the survivors fled Wakari. The algorithm said, get me out of here, we're dealing with people and the people are dying. It stayed behind on the island and searched for survivors. Those are some new poems by myself, Dane Cobain. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Humans Can't Reboot with Mars Behind the Crescent Moon.
Peek through, arguing around the light, hanging high in an empty night, surrounded by a wooden wind, inescapable loneliness, wandering out so far behind the moon, a hidden Mars. Take a bride, are you hanging out here tonight? Hidden behind the crescent moon, you be inside. Will anyone appear? Please come soon. Longing for, waiting for a sign. I can't find any sign of life. Found myself in windswept land, solitude, red sand and habit as a single song. Only words spoken alone. Transmissions far away, way to return one day. Nighttime in the soft wind blows. I can know what I've always known. Think the bride, are you hanging out here tonight? Hidden behind the
That was Live Our Dreams by Umar Ara, and before that we had Mars Behind the Crescent Moon by Humans Can't Reboot. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined now by this week's guest, who is Gemma Applegarth. The first question is one that I ask everybody. You may or may not have an answer to this one. It's, what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
I have fallen down the dark side, and I am reading Prince Harry's autobiography right now.
Well, you and like 20 million other people though, so you're in good company.
Yeah, I feel a little bit embarrassed by it actually, which is a bit weird. What do I think of it? Oh, mixed. Yeah, a little bit. It's actually bringing my mood down a little bit at times.
Oh wow. Yeah, we don't want
So
that.
it's quite powerful in that way.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those. I mean, I haven't read it myself, but I'm sure I will do at some point, because it's one of those. It's going to be a classic charity shop book where it will just be in all of the charity shops. So I'm sure eventually I'll cave and pick up a copy when I see it going cheap. Yeah,
it's a long book though.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
a couple of weeks.
yeah. That's probably why I haven't considered it to date, to be fair. But normally with those kinds of books as well, like, I mean, I'm not particularly a royalist or anything like that, but it's just the fact that so many people have been reading and talking about it that I kind of, you know what I mean? I'm kind of like, well, I have to read it now, even if I wouldn't normally read it, just to see what, you know, to be part of the zeitgeist.
You can't really have an opinion if you haven't actually read it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about books later on, because you have one of your own. But I thought a good place to start would be to ask you, what can you tell us about active mindfulness?
So active mindfulness was basically born out of my own experience. I had a period of time where I guess like many people, I graduated from uni, I worked on my doctorate, I got a job, and in all that time I did no exercise whatsoever because I was too busy. And I just got to a place where I was really unhealthy, very overweight and just not in a good place. And I actually became fairly ill from it. And I found that the two things that really helped me in life generally, but also in that time, were my running, which I restarted, and mindfulness. So I put the two things together and we got active mindfulness. So now I teach other people, mainly people who like to run. I teach them how to use mindfulness skills to support them to be present and in the moment during that run, which can help them really enjoy it a lot more.
Awesome. Well, it's funny. The book I'm reading at the moment is also non-fiction. It's what's it called? It's called The Secret Life of Bletchley Park by Sinclair Mackay. And in that, the reason I mention it is because it was talking about Alan Turing, and he quite liked running. And they reckon that the reason was because, it's a physical challenge, but also as much as a physical challenge, it's also a mental challenge, and you need that kind of mental discipline. And that's kind of what attracted him, because he was obviously a very smart, very clever guy. And he liked the fact that it was a sport that he could take part in that also required him to use his brain and to have that kind of mental discipline as well. So, and I wanted to ask you, my third question here actually builds on really nicely on what you were just saying, which is how do mindfulness and running go hand in hand?
So I found that the two things really do, and it's quite interesting. I recently was at the National Running Show in Birmingham, talking to runners about mindfulness, and I heard over and over again, oh, but I do that naturally when I run. And I thought, well, I'm not teaching you anything that is particularly new. I'm just teaching you how to make it into a skill so that you can also use this when you're not feeling so great, when you have those days where you go out for a run, but you accidentally take your own mind with you, and you take all your problems with you, and you spend the whole time just going over them in an unhelpful way, because sometimes, of course, going over things while you run is a great way of problem solving. But quite often we don't go down the problem solving route. We go down the rumination route or the worrying route, and we go over and over it in our heads. So the two things, I think, work really well together. I think particularly if your focus is on really being with the run and really enjoying it, it can really help you to overcome the kind of thoughts and feelings that get in the way. So I'm training for my first marathon. So every time I go for a run, the thought is, I cannot do this. This is too far. This is too much. What have I signed myself up for? It's too dark. It's too cold. Go back to bed. So you have to overcome those thoughts every single time. And of course, it's the same in life, just getting up, going to work. You have to overcome those thoughts too. So it can be really helpful in that sense. So yeah, the two things can really go well together. And of course, just thinking from a mental health perspective, given, I'm a psychologist, I work also within the NHS, working with people with anxiety and depression. There's now huge amounts of evidence that movement, not necessarily exercise, but movement, moving your body, especially being outside, can be really helpful for managing depression as well, for kind of interrupting that cycle of rumination, for putting you back into an active place, giving you that kind of sense of achievement and that sense of well-being. And if you get a runner's high at the end of it, that's brilliant. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but you are more likely to get that sense of flow, that sense of being like fully immersed within it, really to the point where time just, you don't even know what time's doing. You're not even a part of it. You're just properly in the flow. Yeah, so hopefully they can go really well together.
Awesome. And it's funny with you talking about that, and obviously your background, a lot of those things like challenging those negative thoughts and the idea of rumination and things like that, it reminds me of some of the things I've read up on, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And I wanted to ask, like, how did you first get into the field of mindfulness? Was that through your career and through your psychology background?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so I first heard about it while I was studying for my doctorate. Other people on the course were talking about it, and I kind of gave it a little try, didn't really get it, wasn't that sure about it. It felt a bit too, I guess, airy-fairy for me at the time, maybe a bit too hippie for me at that moment. Mainly because I misunderstood it. I didn't really get what it was. I think I thought it was like a relaxation thing. I didn't really understand that that's quite a different thing to being with whatever it is that comes up for you in that moment. But as time went on, I practiced a little bit more. I started to feel it a little bit more useful. And then I trained to teach it mixed with cognitive behavioral therapy. So for people with anxiety or particularly depression or living with long-term health conditions, we offer mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So we do a little bit of work on behavioral things like getting out, doing things that give you back a sense of value, a sense of achievement. But we also work on being able to notice and observe the thought processes that go on for you, so that you can take a step back from their power. So the thoughts are still there, but you're just taking a step back from their power, which can be really helpful for people who've been through depression or who are living with something that isn't just going to go away, something that's difficult in your life. So I was already a mindfulness teacher when I had that period of time where I wasn't so well, and the doctor sort of said, actually, you need to sort yourself out a bit. So I was going to go back to a running club, but I had a loop tape of thoughts going around in my head. You're too slow. What's the point? Don't bother. Stay home on the sofa. It's fine. And I needed the mindfulness to really help me move beyond the power of those thoughts, so that they stopped disabling me from doing what I needed to do, and allowed me to actually go and join in, really.
Yeah. Well, and because when I was sort of reading up on you about you on your website and things, so I wrote down, like, what would you say to someone who was thinking about getting into sport and fitness, but maybe had been having, again, some of those issues that you mentioned? So maybe they're struggling with self-doubt, or they're anxious about being shamed by other people, or they have body image issues or whatever it might be. What would your message to them be?
I'd probably say start from where you are. So a lot of people think, I'm going to start sport, and then they join a gym or they join a club or something very quickly, and they're not ready for it. They're not emotionally there. They're not physically there. They just don't feel ready. So it becomes like a massive challenge. But one of the things I mentioned earlier was it's movement rather than exercise that is helpful. And we can do that in a number of ways. So I definitely say, find what you're doing anyway and start just by making it a bit more vigorous. So we actually run a group within the NHS for depression with a little bit of protected movement time, and people start from where they are. So some people will go out for a walk or a run in that time. Others will do the washing up, but they'll do it a little bit more energetically because that's where they are. So I definitely say start from where you are, work on being with those thoughts. Those thoughts are going to come up for you, whether you give them permission to or not. It's still to this day, if I go to a race or an event that I've not done before, I'm still like, oh, am I going to be last? Is this going to be bad? So those thoughts still come up, but the difference is not giving them the power, and that's what mindfulness can really support you with. So start from where you are and find a way of working with those thoughts so that they're not against you.
Awesome. Well, and I suppose you can build up bit by bit, a little bit like how you're doing with the training for the marathon. So again, you can start, let's say, you start by doing the housework a little more energetically, and then you start taking a walk, and then you up the speed of your work, and then you start doing a jog, and then you start jogging further and further, and you can do lots of those little goals, and then eventually, before you know it, you are ready to go and join that sports club or that gym or whatever it was that you were thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, the most wonderful thing about this is you set yourself up to succeed rather than set yourself up to feel disappointed. So, we all have a little kind of voice in our head that shouts negative things at us about what we're doing. And we want to kind of put another one in there that says, oh, look, I did that. I achieved this. But to do that, we have to start from where we are and just have the success of going out for that 2-minute walk, or have the success of doing 10 minutes of housework a little bit more vigorously than normal. And then your motivation will build, and it will feel easier to get started than it did the time before.
You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with Gemma Applegarth, and this is Straight 8 with Sweet Soul Music. That was Straight 8 with Sweet Soul Music. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be rejoined in conversation now by Gemma Applegarth. Awesome. Cool. And one of the things I noted on your website somewhere, you talked about the mental training paradox. I wondered if you could tell us what that is.
Yeah, so it's an interesting phenomenon that you'll find particularly with people who do take part in sports, is that they'll say something like, oh, my running is 90% mental and 10% physical, or something along those lines. But when you ask them how much do they prepare their mind versus their body, usually it's the other way around. We train our body 90% and give our mind that 10%. So although we recognize that mental training is really important, we don't tend to do it, which is partly because people don't know how. We've never been taught how, whereas we know that if you exercise your body, you gradually get stronger and you get fitter. But the thoughts just seem like such an overwhelming jumble of madness that it's hard to know where to start. So having something like mindfulness as a starting point can kind of just be your way in. So the mental training paradox is just that phenomenon that we have of recognizing our mental health and our mental abilities and our mental training is really important, but then just not doing it.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And building on that what you were just saying about that a lot of people just don't know how to do this. One of the things I thought was interesting, do you think that mindfulness should be taught in schools? Because it seems to me as though it should be. I mean, that's just my take from what I've learned from you, but I wonder what your take on it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think bearing in mind that there is no magic thing that's going to suit everyone, and that mindfulness will suit some people and not be for others, I think the earlier you can get those skills into people, the more helpful it's going to be. So for me personally, I think if I'd have discovered mindfulness, but also cognitive behavioral therapy at the age of 13, 14, rather than later in life, it would have been more helpful because you would have had all those years to develop the skills. I was very pleased to hear that my 5-year-old nephew has been practicing mindfulness at school and quite surprised. But there are some very innovative ways of doing this with children in a more kind of informal way that makes it more like play, just to start noticing and being aware of their thoughts and moving towards and away from them when it feels helpful for them. I guess my only concern is, as I said, it's not for everyone. And there are some people at certain times in their life where I'd say maybe mindfulness isn't for you right now, particularly people who have been through something very traumatic that is unprocessed. Their coping strategy is often to busy their mind, and that's their way of coping while this is all unprocessed in their head. So I wouldn't want to take that away until they had something else to rely on. So maybe they would need therapy first. So I think, like with everything, we just need to be sensible about this. It would be great to see in schools that we plant the seed of mindfulness and make it something that they feel that they can move forward with if they and their families think it's right for them to do so.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So I know that you teach some courses as well, right? Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I teach a variety of courses. Most of them I've been focusing around runners because it's the sport that I really know, that I really understand. But I have also taught people from other sports like rock climbing and various other things to use what we call MSPE, mindfulness sports performance enhancement, which is using mindfulness to either be more present or to enhance your sport in some way. So the courses vary from kind of couple of hours, maybe even 1 hour workshops that are an introduction, to 4-week courses that give people a really in-depth experience of using meditation in this way. And of course, there's a massive crossover between what we do in terms of sports and what we do in terms of well-being. So people often come for one thing, like running might be their kind of way in, but find that they have a huge benefit in their well-being in different ways, or just across the whole of their life, really.
Cool. Awesome. And so I mentioned at the start of our chat that I want to talk to you about your book. So I wondered if you could just give us a brief sort of summary of what the book is about, what it's called, and how it came about.
Yeah, so the book is called The Adventure of Mindful Running. It's basically an introduction to using mindfulness for movement. So as I said, I focus on running, but you can adapt it to walking or anything else that you might want to do. The principles just remain the same. But it's an introductory course, so it tells you all about it, how it can support you, how to set goals based around mindful practice, and how to get started. So by the end of the course, you've got a really good sense as to whether this is something that you want to invest a lot of your time and energy into, because of course, like everything, the more you practice outside of running, the more you can use it to help you with those things. So sometimes people try and pick up a skill at the last minute when they really, really need it, whether that's because you want to enhance your running or whether that's because you've got a massive life thing going on and you just need something there and then. And we often call that kind of trying to parachute in. It's like you're trying to jump out a plane and make the parachute as you go.
Yeah.
But it would be much better to make it, before you get in the plane, to practice. So the book will just give you a really good sense as to whether this is something that you want to really put your time and energy into.
Cool. And what's the response been like so far from the people that have read it?
Really good so far. So I've had a lot of people say that they really like the fact that I've kind of told my story at the start of how I experienced mindfulness, but also been very open and very honest about the fact that I also have those anxious thoughts, that this isn't something that came about because I can just do this. It wasn't that at all. And it still isn't that. I still will struggle with thoughts of not being good enough, not being strong enough, not being worthy, just like everybody else in the world. But it's much more about what you do with those thoughts, whether you take them on board and keep going over and over and over, or whether you allow them to be there, yet still act in the way that feels most right for you. So a lot of people have really found it helpful. There's been some good reviews on Amazon from people who are starting to use it for their running, but also people who've used it who don't run, who have found it helpful for other things in their life too.
Cool. And what would you say are some of the similarities between, so you're training for a marathon, what are some of the similarities between sort of long distance running and writing a book? Because I imagine there are quite a few.
For me, the big one that comes to mind is, I'm going to say stamina. The other part of my mind wants to say stubbornness, because they're kind of the same thing. But it is that stamina. It's that kind of, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. But as part of keep going doesn't mean the ride is smooth. It means that sometimes it's going to be really difficult. So within training for a marathon, sometimes it's because my knees really hurt or my legs really hurt, or it's really cold and wet and dark outside and I don't want to go. And within writing the book, it was more about, I couldn't quite get across what I wanted to say, or it didn't feel quite right, or I worried that nobody was going to like it, but it's the same thought processes, just with different things going on. So definitely a lot of similarities there. And I've actually finding the two things work very well together. Certainly with the training for the marathon, because I'd done about 10 half marathons, but I'd never gone beyond the 13 miles. And I don't think I believed that I could. So to have your first training run where you go beyond that, and not only go beyond that, but you're uncomfortable for the last 5 miles, yet you still keep going anyway. It's just the most amazing thing to take into the rest of your life, that you can get up no matter what is going on for you, no matter what's happening for you. You can get up and start again. And it may be that sometimes you have to take time away. That's okay. To take care of yourself is absolutely fine, but you're still moving forward. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, just got a couple of questions left. One of them, I wondered if you could define for us, what is mudfulness?
Mudfulness. So I love cross-country running, and it was the big thing that I wanted to join, but it took me about 3 years of being a member of my club to join, because I felt like the cross-country was for the kind of the very elite people in our club, that it was for the people who could run really fast, and I would just look like an idiot. So I had that loop tape on my mind. But I knew that I would love it, and the reason I love it is because when you run in mud in cross country, you hear the sound of the squelching of the mud. You feel the squishing, you feel the slipping, the sliding, you feel the mud on your skin, you feel the air on your skin. It's much more of a sensual experience because of the mud. And it is very much like when you're a kid and you splash in the puddles and you're not thinking about the future and whether you're going to need to wash your clothes, and you're not thinking about the past. You're like right in that moment. So mudfulness is my experience of mindful running when it's a very wet cross country. And it's so much fun.
Cool, great. Okay, and the last question, it's technically 2 in 1 really, but it's what's next for you and where can people go to find out more? So where can they follow you, get the book, all of that good stuff? So
you can get the book on Amazon. I'm also most active on the Active Mindfulness Facebook page and the Gemma_Active Mindfulness Instagram page. There is also a website, which is www.activemindfulness.org.uk. I'm very friendly, so please do email me and get in touch. I could talk about mindfulness all day, every day. So I'm quite happy to answer people's questions and things. What's next for me? The marathon is taking my whole mind. I don't know if you know, but getting a place in the London is incredibly difficult. You go into a ballot, most people get rejected. I was rejected 7 times. And then when I finally got a place, I was pregnant and couldn't run. But I've been able to defer. So it feels like a massive, massive deal for me to be able to do this. And when that's done, I hope that there will be another book that will focus on movement and well-being more generally, more for everybody.
Awesome. Big thank you to Gemma Applegarth for joining me. You're listening to The Arch on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Hogarth's Wolf with Fountains of Bimini.
Focuses the mind on who are you, but consuming, lust enduring, a phantom of long ago, and a lightning that tracks twice to the same soft spot. The quickening drum, it's a Lemurian skin, my riddles to write. Are you the music refused by you? Get for an age, oh vanity's fair maid. In the eyes of a fool who hides from the storm, hides from the storm, and a lightning that tracks twice to the same soft spot of the quickening drum. It's a Lemurian skin, and it
That was Magic Circle by Sloth in the City, and before that we had Fountains of Bimini by Hogarth's Wolf. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to join Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed now for this week's album review.
The definitive Everly Brothers. The Everly Brothers were the original warring siblings. Before Ray and Dave Davis and Liam and Noel Gallagher, there was Don and Phil Everly. It is said that siblings make the best harmony partners. The Beach Boys and the Bee Gees are examples of this. Phil and Don had a distinctive close harmony sound, a sound that influenced Simon and Garfunkel, who covered the Everlys' song Bye Bye Love. Both brothers both played guitar, and I read in Keith Richards' autobiography that he was influenced by them. Their music was a mix of country and rock and roll, and had a distinctive raw energy. Listening to the early hits, I was amazed how much they relied on just their powerful strumming and their precise singing, and how little there was in the way of rhythm section or lead guitar. Songs like Bye Bye Love and Wake Up Little Susie have surprisingly simple arrangements. But like Elvis, I assume the people in charge thought they could improve on an almost perfect sound. As they entered the 60s, strings started to appear, even backing singers. The song that stands out for me as the ultimate Everly Brothers production is Kathy's Clown. There are more musicians, even a piano, but it still has their original sound. From there on we start to get those early 60s wobbly tremolo guitars and those muted arpeggios. They start doing Tin Pan Alley covers, and typical of the time there is a death song with a long spoken section. Listening to these compilations of old rock and roll acts, it did seem that they covered a lot of each other's songs, like there weren't enough to go round. Often white artists would cover songs by black artists, taking the edge off them and polishing them up for white middle America. Here the Everlys do Little Richard's Lucille, but on this CD the Everlys also do That'll Be the Day, a Buddy Holly song, and Claudette, a Roy Orbison song. Many of their famous songs were written by the songwriting team Bordelot and Felice Bryant, but a surprisingly large number were written by either one or both brothers, including Kathy's Clown, When Will I Be Loved, The Price of Love, Until I Kissed You. At one point they tried to sound like the Beatles with their self-penned song Gone, 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 though it really was the Beatles who had tried to sound a bit like the Everly Brothers. Gone, Gone, Gone is probably better known for the Robert Plant and Alison Krauss cover. And then there is the song Love is Strange, with that oh that has become the most annoying part of Andrew Lloyd Webber's annoying catalogue, with its inclusion in Any Dream Will Do. This compilation ends with a 1980s Paul McCartney song, which captures their rapid strumming, but then dates it with contemporary production. The Everly Brothers, the definitive collection.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Gemma Applegarth for being this week's guest. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can drop me a line here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s, people in the local art scene. Don't hesitate to get in touch. We are repeated on Monday nights on Wickham Sound. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And you can find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound. So that's it for another week. I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Frank Birtwistle with Winter Hill. I'll catch you next time.
Agatha Christie came to tea. When? She knocked on the door and asked for me. When? She arrived at 3:10. When?